The auctioneer's gavel cracked like thunder as Sheriff Caspian Nightingale raised his hand one final time, his heart hammering against his ribs. Sold to the sheriff for $800. The crowd of weathered farmers and merchants dispersed, their murmurs following them into the dusty streets of Willowmere. But Caspian couldn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the young woman standing on the wooden platform, her wrists bound with rope, her auburn hair catching the late afternoon sun like spun copper. It was the birthmark that had stopped his breath. A crescent moon behind her left ear, identical to the one he'd traced with his finger 20 years ago, when his baby sister Opaline had fallen asleep in his lap. The same mark their mother had kissed goodnight before the Apache raid that tore their family apart. "Come to collect your purchase, Sheriff." The slave trader's voice sliced through his memories like a rusty blade. Caspian's hand trembled as he counted out the bills. The woman Opaline lifted her eyes to meet his, and the recognition that flickered there nearly brought him to his knees. She knew. Somehow, despite the years and the hell she'd endured, she knew. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They call me Dove," she replied, but her lips formed different words, only he could read. "Brother," the trader handed over the papers of ownership, and Caspian felt sick. His own sister. He owned his own sister. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, as he cut the ropes from her wrists with shaking hands. "Home," he said, though he wasn't sure where that was anymore. As they walked through Willowmere's main street, Caspian's mind raced. How could he explain this to the town? To his wife Millicent, who'd been trying to give him children for 3 barren years? How could he explain that the woman he'd just purchased, the woman whose beauty had caught every man's eye at the auction, was his lost sister? But it was worse than that, and he knew it. Because in the moment before recognition had crashed over him, in that split second when he'd first seen her on the platform, what he'd felt hadn't been brotherly protection, it had been desire. Pure, undeniable, consuming desire for a woman he'd thought was a stranger. "You bought me," Opaline said quietly as they reached his house at the end of Maple Street. "Out of all those men, you bought me." "I had to," he said, fumbling with his keys. "When I saw the mark, ... when I knew, ... double quotes. Did you know before or after?" Her voice was steady, but he heard the tremor underneath. He couldn't lie to her. Not to Opaline. Not to the sister he'd promised their dying father he'd protect. After he admitted, "I saw you and I wanted. Then I saw the mark." She nodded, slowly understanding passing between them like a shared sin. "What happens now, Caspian?" The sound of his name on her lips the first time she'd spoken it in 20 years nearly undid him completely. Inside the modest 2-story house, Millicent Nightingale stood frozen at the kitchen window, her delicate hands gripping the curtains. She'd watched her husband bid on the slave girl with an intensity that had made her stomach twist with jealousy. Now, seeing them together on her front porch, whispering like lovers, she felt something darker than jealousy bloom in her chest. "Millicent," Caspian said as they entered. His wife's pale blue eyes moved from his face to Opaline's, taking in every detail of the younger woman's exotic beauty. "Right. So this is your ... purchase." The word dripped with venom. "This is Opaline," he said quietly. "My sister." The silence that followed was deafening. Millicent's face cycled through disbelief, shock, and finally, cold calculation. "Your sister," she repeated. "The one who died in the Apache raid. She didn't die. She was taken. Sold." Caspian's voice cracked. "I've been looking for her for 20 years. Millicent's laugh was bitter. "How convenient. You buy a beautiful slave girl, and suddenly she's your long-lost sister." Show her," Opaline said quietly, turning to reveal the crescent birthmark behind her ear. Millicent's face went white. She'd heard the story of Caspian's lost family countless times during their courtship. She knew about the birthmark. "Even if that's true," Millicent said slowly, "what will people think? The sheriff, living with a woman who isn't his wife? Woman he bought at a slave auction?" "I don't care what people think," Caspian said, but even as he spoke the words, he knew he was lying. His reputation was everything in a town like Willowmere. Without it, he was nothing. You should, Millicent's voice turned silky, dangerous. Because I've seen the way you look at her husband. Sister or not, that look wasn't brotherly. Heat flooded Caspian's face. Millicent, it's all right, Opaline interrupted. Oh, go. I can find work somewhere else, maybe in the next town over. No. The word exploded from Caspian with such force that both women stepped back. You're not leaving. Not again. I won't lose you again. That night, as Millicent lay rigid beside him in their marriage bed, Caspian stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about Opaline sleeping in the room down the hall. Tried not to remember the way her skin had looked in the lamplight, the way her eyes had held his when she'd whispered his name. She was his sister, his blood. The child he'd failed to protect 20 years ago, so why did his body betray him every time she was near? Down the hall, Opaline pressed her face into the pillow and wept silently. She remembered Caspian as a boy, 12 years old and fierce, promising their father he'd take care of her always. Now he was a man, tall and strong, with gentle hands, and eyes full of pain that mirrored her own. But the years had changed them both. The years and the things that had been done to her. The things she'd been forced to do. She wasn't the innocent little girl he remembered. And he wasn't her big brother anymore. He was a man who'd looked at her with hunger before he'd known who she was. A man whose touch made her skin burn with feelings that had nothing to do with familial love. They were strangers now, bound by blood and separated by 20 years of hell. And they were both married, he to Millicent. She had 2 secrets that could destroy them all. 3 weeks passed in a delicate dance of avoidance and stolen glances. Caspian threw himself into his duties as sheriff, spending long hours patrolling Willowmere's quiet streets and investigating minor disputes between neighbors. Anything to avoid being alone with Opaline, but even when he wasn't home, he couldn't escape her. The scent of lavender soap that clung to her hair haunted his office. The memory of her laugh, frail and precious, when it echoed in his mind during the longest days. Millicent, meanwhile, had become a woman possessed. She watched Opaline's every movement with the intensity of a hawk, cataloging each interaction. With her husband, each shared memory that excluded her. The servants whispered, the neighbors stared. And through it all, Millicent's resentment grew like a cancer. Tell me about the Apache, she said one evening over dinner, her voice deceptively. Casual Opaline's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Caspian looked up sharply from his plate. Millicent, he warned. What? I'm curious about my sister -- laws. As ... experiences. The word dripped with false sweetness. 20 years is a long time. You must have learned their ways quite thoroughly. Color drained from Opaline's face. I survived, she said quietly. That's all that matters. Did you take one of them as a husband? Have children with them, Millicent? Caspian's voice cracked like a whip. But Opaline was already standing, her napkin falling to the floor. Excuse me, she whispered, fleeing toward the stairs. Caspian found her later on the back porch, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the stars. He approached carefully, as if she might bolt like a frightened deer. She has no right to ask those questions, he said. She has every right. I'm living in her home, eating her food, sleeping under her roof. Opaline's voice was steady, but he could see the tears on her cheeks in the moonlight. She's your wife. You're my sister. The words hung between them, heavy with all the things they couldn't say. Am I? Opaline turned to face him, and the raw pain in her eyes made his chest ache. Because sometimes when you look at me, I don't feel like your sister. I feel like it's like something else entirely. Caspian's hands clenched at his sides. Opaline, do you know what they did to me? The question was barely a whisper. The Apache chief, who bought me from the raiders, he made me his wife, his second wife. I bore him 3 children, Caspian. 3 children who died of fever before their 5th birthdays. The confession hit him like a physical blow. Opaline. He died. His brother sold me to a trader. I've been sold 6 times since then. 6 times. She laughed, but it was a broken sound. Do you know what that does to a person? To be treated like property for 20 years? You're not property anymore, he said fiercely. You're free. You're home, am I? Because according to the law, you own me now. You have papers that say so. Before he could stop himself, Caspian reached out and cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was soft, impossibly soft, and warm beneath his palms. I'll burn those papers, he said. Right now. I'll burn them and you'll be free. And then what? Her eyes searched his face. What happens to us then? The question they'd both been avoiding hung in the air between them, because they both knew the truth that freedom wouldn't change the way he looked at her, wouldn't change the way her pulse raced when he was near. I don't know, he admitted. Neither do I. She leaned into his touch for just a moment before stepping back. But I know this can't continue. This, whatever this is between us. There's nothing between us, he said, but even as he spoke the words, he knew they were a lie. Isn't there? Her smile was sad and knowing. Then why are you touching me like you want to kiss me? The next morning brought catastrophe in the form of Reverend Cornelius Blackthorne and 3 of Willamere's most prominent citizens, Mayor Ignatius Cromwell, Dr. Barnabas Ashworth, and Merchant Prince Lysander Fairfax. They stood in Caspian's front parlor like harbingers of judgment, their faces grave with righteous indignation. Sheriff Nightingale, Reverend Blackthorne began, his voice resonating with biblical authority. We've come to discuss the ... situation you've created in our God-fearing community. Millicent sat primly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap, but Caspian caught the satisfied gleam in her eyes. She'd orchestrated this, called these men here to force his hand. What situation might that be, Reverend? Caspian kept his voice level, professional. Don't insult our intelligence, Mayor Cromwell interjected. The whole town's talking about your slave girl, about the way you look at her, about the ... improprieties ... occurring under your own roof. Improprieties, Caspian's voice dropped to a dangerous register. Are you accusing me of something, Mayor? We're trying to give you a chance to explain yourself, Dr. Ashworth said diplomatically, before the situation gets out of hand. At that moment, Opaline appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of coffee. She dressed modestly in a high-necked brown dress, her hair pulled back severely, but even her attempts at plainness couldn't diminish her natural beauty. The men's eyes followed her every movement as she served them, and Caspian felt a familiar surge of possessive rage. Thank you, ... visit? Reverend Blackthorne's smile was cold. Perhaps you'd like to tell us about your ... relationship with a good sheriff. Opolin's hands trembled slightly as she set down the last cup. Sheriff Nightingale is my master. Bought me fair and square. Just your master? Lysander Fairfax leaned forward, his eyes calculating. Because the way I hear it, you're claiming to be his sister. I am his sister. Opaline's voice was steady, but Caspian could see the fear in her eyes. How convenient, Cromwell sneered. A slave girl claims kinship with the town's sheriff. Proof do you have of this alleged relationship? Caspian started to stand, but Opaline moved first. Without hesitation, she turned and lifted her hair, revealing the crescent birthmark behind her ear. The men leaned forward to examine it, their faces skeptical. Birthmarks can be faked, Dr. Ashworth said dismissively. It's a bit of ink. Some careful artistry. It's not fake, Caspian said through gritted teeth. Even if it's real, Reverend Blackthorne continued, even if she is your sister, the appearance of impropriety is almost as damaging as impropriety itself. Good Christian folks are talking, Sheriff. They're saying things that could destroy your reputation, your marriage, your position in this community. What are you suggesting? But Caspian already knew. He could see it in their faces, in Millicent's triumphant expression. Sell her, Fairfax said bluntly. I'll give you $1,000 right now. More than you paid. You'll make a profit, and this whole mess disappears. The room went deadly quiet. Opaline's face had gone pale as parchment. No, Caspian said quietly. Be reasonable, man, Mayor Cromwell pressed. Your wife is suffering. The town is talking. This can't continue. But I said no. Then, perhaps, Reverend Blackthorne's voice turned silky with menace. We need to discuss removing you from your position as sheriff. A man who can't manage his own household can hardly be trusted to manage the town's law and order. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Caspian looked at each man in turn, seeing the determination in their faces. They would do it. It would destroy him to get what they wanted. I need time to think, he said finally. Shh. You have until Sunday. Blackthorn stood, the others following suit. After my sermon about moral purity and Christian virtue, the congregation will expect an answer. Either the girl goes or you do. After they left, the house fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Millicent excused herself with obvious satisfaction, leaving Caspian and Opaline alone. In the parlor. I'll go, Opaline said quietly. I'll go with Fairfax. It'll be better than being sold to someone worse. It's like hell you will. Caspian's voice was raw. I just found you, not losing you again. Then what? You'll lose everything else instead. Your job, your reputation, your marriage. Yes, he said without hesitation. If that's what it takes. The admission hung between them like a confession of sin. Sunday morning arrived gray and oppressive, with storm clouds gathering over Willowmere like an omen. The entire town packed into the white clapboard church there. Faces bright with anticipation for the drama they knew was coming, Reverend Blackthorn took the pulpit with the fervor of an Old Testament prophet, his eyes blazing as he launched into a sermon about moral corruption and the dangers of harboring sin in righteous communities. Every word was aimed like an arrow at Caspian, who sat rigid in the front pew with Millicent beside him and openly, conspicuously absent. When we allow wickedness to flourish among us, Blackthorn thundered, we invite God's wrath upon our entire community. We must root out corruption wherever we find it, no matter how high or how mighty the sinner believes himself to be. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. Caspian felt their eyes on him, felt their judgment like physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders. But as the Reverend's voice rose to a crescendo, the church doors burst open with a crash that echoed like gunfire. Opaline stood silhouetted in the doorway, but she was transformed. Gone was the modest brown dress, replaced by the white deerskin garments of Apache nobility, intricately beaded, fringed with silver, a testament to the years she'd spent as a chief's wife. Her hair flowed loose down her back, adorned with feathers and turquoise beads. War paint marked her cheekbones in traditional patterns, and around her neck hung a necklace of bear claws that spoke of honors earned in ways civilized people couldn't imagine. She was magnificent, terrifying, utterly, completely other. The congregation gasped collectively, some of the women shrieking as she walked down the center aisle with the fluid grace of a predator. But her eyes never left Caspian's face. You want to know what I am? She called out, her voice carrying easily through the shocked silence. I am Ayanna Nightingale, daughter of Thomas Nightingale, sister to Caspian Nightingale, and widow of Chief Nalnish of the Chiricahua Apache. She stopped directly in front of the pulpit, staring up at Reverend Blackthorn with challenge blazing. In her dark eyes, I was taken from my family as a child, sold like livestock, made to bear children who died in my arms. I have survived things that would break every person in this church. Her voice rose, powerful and clear. And now you dare to judge my brother for showing me mercy, for giving me sanctuary? This is a house of God. Blackthorn sputtered. You cannot. Cannot what? Copeline laughed, a sound like winter wind through pine trees. Cannot speak the truth? Cannot call out your hypocrisy? She turned to face the congregation, her arms spread wide. Which of you has never sinned? Which of you has? Never felt desire for someone you shouldn't? Never told lies to protect yourselves? Never turned away from suffering because it was convenient? Now Caspian rose slowly from his pew, his heart hammering with pride and terror. She was magnificent. His sister, fierce and proud and unbroken, despite everything the world had done to her. Enough. Mayor Cromwell stood, his face purple with rage. Sheriff, control your... your property. She's not my property, Caspian said, his voice carrying clearly through the church. She never was. She's my sister, and she's free. Free, too. Corrupt our community with her heathen ways? Dr. Ashworth demanded. Free to live her life as she chooses, Caspian replied. He moved to stand beside Opaline, and she reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined, and he felt her strength flow into him like electricity.
Ow.
Then choose Reverend Blackthorn's. The voice was cold as winter. Her or us. Your savage sister or your Christian community. You cannot have both. The church fell silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on Caspian's face. In the front pew, Millicent sat frozen, her face a mask of bitter triumph. She thought she'd won. Thought he would choose respectability over family. She was wrong. I choose her, Caspian said quietly. I choose my sister. I choose family over fear, love over law, truth over appearances. He squeezed Opaline's hand. And if that makes me unfit to serve this community, then so be it. He began to remove the silver star from his chest, but Opaline's hand closed over his, stopping him. No, she said softly. Don't let them take this from you too. I won't let them take you, he replied. Then we leave. Together tonight. Around. Them, the congregation began to buzz with whispered conversations, but Caspian heard none of it. All he could see was his sister's face. All he could feel was the rightness of their joined hands. Together, he agreed. That night, as Willowmere slept under a canopy of stars, Caspian loaded their few possessions into a wagon behind the house. Millicent had locked herself in their bedroom hours earlier, her sobs echoing through the walls, like a funeral dirge. He'd tried to speak to her, to explain, but she'd refused to see him. Perhaps it was better that way. Are you sure about this? Opaline asked, emerging from the house carrying a small bundle of her belongings. She'd changed back into traveling clothes, practical leather pants, and a wool shirt that had once belonged to him. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he replied, securing a trunk in the wagon bed. You're giving up everything. For me, your job, your home, your wife. My wife stopped loving me years ago, he said quietly. She married the badge, not the man. And as for the rest, ... he shrugged. Things can be replaced. People can't. They worked in comfortable silence. Loading supplies for the journey west. California, they'd decided. A new state, far from the ghosts of Texas and the judgment of small-minded people. Caspian. Opaline's voice was soft, uncertain. What we talked about on the porch. It's about the way you look at me. ... His hands stilled on the wagon harness. I need to know if you're leaving because you love me as a brother, or because you love me as... She couldn't finish the sentence. He turned to face her, his heart hammering against his ribs. In the moonlight, she looked ethereal, otherworldly. The sister he'd lost and the woman she'd become, all wrapped into one, impossible, beautiful, forbidden. Package. Both, he said honestly. God help me both. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. That's what I thought, she whispered. That's what I was afraid of. Afraid because I feel it too. The words came out. In a rush, as if she had to say them before she lost her courage. When I saw you at that auction, before I knew who you were, my heart stopped. You were just this beautiful, strong man, looking at me like I was worth something, like I was precious. Caspian closed his eyes, pain and relief warring in his chest. We can't. I know we can't. I know it's wrong. But knowing doesn't make it stop, does it? No, he admitted. It doesn't. They stood in the darkness, the weight of their shared confessions settling around them like chains. So what do we do? She asked. We go to California. We start over. Find a way to live with this. And if we can't... The question hung in the air, answered and unanswerable. A sound from the house made them both freeze the creak of the front door opening. Millicent appeared on the porch, wrapped in her white nightgown, her face pale as bone in the moonlight. So, this is how it ends, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. My husband abandoning me for his savage sister. Millicent. Caspian started toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. Don't. Don't you dare try to explain this away. I've seen the way you look at her. The way she looks at you. Whatever sick, twisted thing is between you two, don't insult me by pretending it's just brotherly love. Heat flooded Caspian's face. It's not what you think, isn't it? Millicent's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Then why are you running away with her in the middle of the night? Why are you choosing her over your lawful wife? Because she's my family, Caspian said quietly. The only family I have left. And what am I? The question hung in the air, painful in its simplicity, because they both knew the answer she was. The woman he'd married out of loneliness, not love. The woman who'd shared his bed, but never his heart. You deserve better, he said finally. You deserve a man who can love you the way you need to be loved, and you can't. No, he said honestly, I can't. Millicent's composure cracked, tears streaming down her face. Damn you both, she whispered. Damn you both to hell. She turned and fled back into the house, the door slamming behind her with the finality of a coffin lid. Opaline touched his arm gently. I'm sorry, so am I, he said. But not for leaving, for waiting so long to do it. They finished loading the wagon in silence, both lost in thoughts too dangerous to voice. As dawn approached, they climbed onto the driver's seat, and Caspian took the reins. Ready? He asked. Opaline looked back at the house one last time, then at the man beside Hertha. Brotherhood become something more, something impossible, something that might destroy them both. Ready, she said. 6 months later, they stood on a cliff, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching the sun set over waters that stretched beyond the horizon. The small ranch they'd bought with Caspian's savings was modest but comfortable, a place where they could start over, where no one knew their story or questioned their relationship. They'd introduced themselves as the Nightingales, brother and sister from Texas, and the local townspeople had accepted them without suspicion. Caspian had taken work as a deputy sheriff in the nearby town of Crescent Bay. And Opaline had started a small business crafting beaded jewelry that combined Apache techniques with California gold rush aesthetics. From the outside, they looked like any other frontier family making a new life in the Golden West. But inside their small house, the tension that had driven them from Texas continued to simmer like a pot, always on the verge of boiling over. The Hendersons invited us to their harvest dance next week, Opaline said, not looking at him as she spoke.
Mrs. Henderson thinks you should meet her daughter, Rebecca.
Says she's a fine Christian girl who would make a good wife. Caspian's hands tightened on the porch railing. I'm not interested in meeting Rebecca Henderson. Why not? She's pretty, from what I've seen. Young, pure. Everything a man could want in a wife. Is that what you want? For me to take another wife? Opaline was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the waves below. I want you to be happy. And you think marrying Rebecca Henderson would make me happy? I think pretending to be my brother for the rest of your life will eventually destroy you. The words hit him like a physical blow, because she was right. The constant pretense, the careful distance they maintained in public, the way they had to monitor every glance, every gesture, every word to avoid suspicion. It was slowly killing them both. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time we stopped pretending we're something we're not. Caspian turned to stare at her, his heart hammering. Opaline, we're not really brother and sister anymore, are we? Her voice was barely a whisper. 20 years. Apart, different lives, different worlds. The children we were died a long time ago. We share blood. So do thousands of people who've never met. Blood doesn't make a family, Caspian. Love does. Loyalty does. Choice does. She finally turned to look at him, and the raw honesty in her eyes took his breath away. I choose you, she said simply. Not as a brother, not as a memory of who we used to be, but as the man you are now. The man who saved me.
Oh.
The man who gave up everything to protect me. The people of Willowmere were right, he said hoarsely. This is wrong, sinful, according to whose definition? The God who let me be. Stolen from my family? The society that sold me like cattle? The church that wanted to separate us? She stepped closer, her hand reaching up to touch his face. Or according to our hearts, which have never led us wrong. His resolve crumbled like sand before the tide. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek, and felt 20 years of guilt and desire and desperate love wash over him like a wave. I love you, he whispered. God forgive me. I love you. Then love me, she replied. Choose me. Not as your sister, not as your burden, but as your woman. The kiss that followed was inevitable as sunrise, passionate as wildfire and sweet as redemption. All the months of careful distance, all the years of separation, all the pain and loss and longing poured out between them in that single, perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both were crying. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we start over. Really start over. We choose new names, a new story. We become the people we were meant to be. And if people find out the truth, then we'll face it together." She smiled through her tears. "We've survived worse things than gossip." He kissed her again, softer this time, tasting hope and future and the promise of happiness they'd both thought lost forever. "What should we call ourselves?" he asked. "Whatever we want," she replied. "We're free now, free to be whoever we choose to be." As the sun disappeared into the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Caspian and Openenor, whoever they would become, stood, wrapped in each other's arms, ready to write the next chapter of their story, a story of love that transcended convention, of family that chose itself, of two souls who had found their way home to each other despite all the forces that had tried to keep them apart. It wasn't the ending anyone else would have written for them, but it was theirs, and that was enough. In the distance, wedding bells rang out from Crescent Bay's little white church, and Opaline smiled against Caspian's lips. "Shall we make it official?" she whispered. "I thought you'd never ask," he replied, and as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together no longer as brother and sister, but as husband and wife, bound not by blood or law or society's expectations, but by the one thing that had always been stronger than all of those: love.